So it's a rainy day out today. It's really hard to find a nice quiet place to record, so I have this little study room here. And if I say so myself, this is kind of a sad space. I'd prefer to be out in the sunshine, but we'll make do. Let's get to it. So I get a lot of comments similar to this one, which is pretty much, what first fixed gear should I buy? And a lot of people, a lot of beginners ask, is the Pure Fix any good? Is the Volano any good? Etc, etc. So today, let's take a look at how to spot bad beginner bikes. Now, what I mean by bad bikes is that these bikes are beginner bikes that cost way more than they should. Most of the times, the quality of the components that they give you for the price just isn't up to par with what your money can buy. And that's what I mean by a bad bike. So let's take a look at some of the marks that a lot of bad beginner bikes have. Now, one of the main overarching themes that we can see with bad beginner bikes is that they really value form over function. A lot of beginner bike companies like to really push that selling point that they have a lot of color options available. And that's because people like customizability, and that is one of the main appeals of riding a fixed gear bike. So what a lot of beginner bike companies do is that they really push those salient attributes to their buyers, which is the color of the frames and the color of the wheels. But really now, the key for determining quality is in the geometry charts and in the specs list. A lot of those beginner bike companies don't really provide a readily available specs list or geometry chart, and these things are really key. And a common theme that we can see in the specs list, if they do even offer a specs list, is that they have a lot of generic parts. And so with beginner bikes, it seems like they hide their lack of quality with more color options. And this gives them the illusion of choice. In reality, all these bikes, although they have different names, are actually the same bike. And the only difference that you get is in color and in name, if you want to name your bike. And because of that, they can lead beginners astray from what real quality actually is. Now, another key for determining quality is geometry charts, and a lot of beginners are not going to know what any of the numbers mean on geometry charts. But the key for fitment lies within the geometry chart, and most beginner bike companies just list a very rough estimate on how to find the fitment of your bike based on height and standover. While these measurements certainly are important, they are only a small piece of the entire puzzle that is a proper fit. And a proper fit, as we all know, is the most important thing to consider when buying a new bike. Now, these measurements will get the rider into the ballpark range of what kind of bike they should be riding, but the bottom line is that a lot of times riders are getting the wrong sized bike, which is bad. Along with the lack of specifications and geometry charts, a lot of these beginner bike websites do have some really nice photo sets, but that's probably to distract you from the fact that they're selling you a crappy bike. Again, these photo sets echo the sentiment of form over function. So be wary of sick photography. One of the most obvious ways that you could spot a low quality beginner's bike is through the colorful deep dish wheels. Now, these wheels, of course, appeal to beginners because a lot of beginners think that they look cool and they offer that customizability factor. Wheels and other components should not be judged on color, but that's what beginners tend to focus on because it's the easiest thing to look at. But they should be judged on performance. And when looking at wheels, we want to look at the durability and the weight. So with these criteria in mind, let's judge these wheels. Now, a lot of these deep dish wheels that come on these beginner bikes are about 40 to 45 millimeters deep. Now, this is pretty deep for a double-walled aluminum wheel. This means that it is really heavy. So these wheels kind of suck in the weight department. Now, as far as durability goes, most of these are loose ball bearing hubs, meaning that you're going to have to service them frequently, or you're just going to have to deal with a crunchy wheel. Now, my friend has had personal experience with the Pure Fix wheel set, and let me tell you, it sucked. The wheels began to feel really crunchy and always just needed to be serviced after about 3 months of regular use. Along with that, the wheel just never stayed true. We would true it frequently, but the hubs or something, or maybe our truing skills, but I'd like to think it's the crappiness of the product, just would not keep the wheel true. And because of that, it just always needed attention. It just never rode as it was intended to ride, and it just sucked, and it was a pain to deal with. So again, those deep dish colorful wheels are one of the most readily visible parts to look for on a bad choice for a beginner's bike. Another component to take into consideration when looking for those bad beginner bikes is the frame and fork. A lot of times, really low quality beginner bikes will have high tensile steel frames, and this is just the cheapest steel that one can produce a bike out of, and it tends to be heavier than the 4130 chromoly or even Reynolds counterparts. Now, when looking at the fork, a lot of cheapo bikes will have unicrown forks. Now, there isn't anything functionally wrong with unicrown forks, it's just that you're not going to find a nice lugged fork on a cheap bike. Unless it's the Kilo TT, because that thing's a good deal. They need to pay me for how much I recommend that bike. But if a bike comes with a unicrown fork, it's probably going to be a lower quality entry-level bike. There isn't anything wrong with the fork, it's just that it's going to be a cheaper bike because people like nice forks on their nice bikes. Now, before I get into this, I really do hate speaking negatively about bike companies. I like to keep things positive, but in my personal opinion, your money can be much better spent elsewhere. Now, let's take a look at a couple of examples for these cheapo beginner bikes that really shouldn't cost as much as they're selling them for. One of the main examples that can come straight to my mind is Pure Fix Cycles. Now, Pure Fix sells these really low quality, bottom of the barrel, entry-level bikes with all those color options and with those lack of important specs and geometry details for $350. Now, the main reason that they leave out all of those geometry and specs details is because that's not their target market. They're targeting people who are looking to get on a fixed gear bike and not really have to worry about the finer details, even if that means getting a crappier bike. The problem that I have with Pure Cycles, or Pure Fix as they are previously known, is that they are selling these bikes for way more than they are worth. So $350 for this really bottom of the barrel bike is not a good deal at all. Compare this Pure Fix Cycles to an almost identical bike from citygrounds.com that cost $189. Now, these are nearly identical bikes, and the Pure Fix cost almost double that from the one in City Grounds. Now, the one on City Grounds is also just a really cheap bike that's meant for just minimal use and maybe some weekend rides. But the reason why I don't have a problem with the City Grounds bike is because $189 is a perfectly fair price for this quality of a bike. Some other beginner fixed gears that echo that color as quality and form over function sentiment include Zyklefix, Big Shot Bikes, and Villano. And there's probably a whole slew of other beginner fixed gears that I can't even think of, but those are the ones off the top of my head that I would avoid. And just be sure to look out for those marks of really deep dish, crappy colored wheels and high tensile steel frames, and if they really advertise form over function. And this is kind of a dangerous territory for you to be spending your money if you want a quality bike. Now, a company that would have most definitely been in this form over function category of beginner fixed gear bikes is State Bicycle Co. They would have been here in the past because before the quality of the bikes just weren't up to par for what they were selling. Now, I still don't think that the quality of their bicycles are quite up to par to their price, but they are getting better. They have published specifications for the bike, they do have geometry charts, and they do have a published weight for their bike. And judging by how high that weight is, it seems like it could be a pretty honest depiction of their weight. Along with that, they now have 4130 chromoly frame sets and sealed bearing hubs, which is a step in the right direction. So it'll be interesting to see the quality to price ratio that State bikes will take in the future. So to recap, the purpose of these entry-level bikes is just to introduce people into cycling who don't really want to sink a whole lot of cash into a hobby that they might not like. Now, the problem that I have is not with the bikes themselves. The problem that I have is that these companies are selling these bikes for way more than they're actually worth, and they're really preying on that uninformed market, and they're passing off color as quality when in reality that's not the case at all. And they're selling these crappy bikes for these really high prices. That just isn't honest. I like honesty. So what do you all think of these colorful entry-level fixed gears? Do you have any experience with them, or do you have friends that have had experience with them? And if so, were they worth your money? Am I wrong about my analysis of these colorful entry-level fixed gear bikes? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, I will see you all in the next video of how much my bike cost and how much of a nut I am for spending so much money on a bicycle.